Welcome to Satsang on March 19th, 2026. And today we're going to have kind of some fun. I selected a piece from Ramesh, and that chapter actually is out on the site if you want to pull it down. The interesting thing about it was that it's called "Your Head in the Tiger's Mouth," and that's a very famous Ramana response when people would get really kind of agitated or excited about when's it going to happen to me. Um, he would always tell them, he would say, your head is in the tiger's mouth and we're just simply waiting for it to snap shut. So Ramesh lifted that and used it as a title of one of his books. And and tonight what we're going to take a peek at is just going to be we're going to watch how the pointers are built into the conversation in this particular satsang. Um, because the ultimate emphasis of tonight's is to recognize where you are relative to the pointers, right? Not collect them all, not assume one's equal to the other, that kind of thing. So there is a discriminatory piece, within all of us, within consciousness that lives itself through us, that that has a recognition part to peek at, when one is applicable to us, to where the journey is right now. And so that's just that part of the wisdom that I wanted to call out. So we'll start, and you're going to see, I'll point out as we go along, I'll say, look, here's another pointer that Ramesh dropped in, and you'll see as he goes along how he drops them in and how they're layered, or actually how he'll walk somebody from the beginning point and explain to them how it's going to happen. So that's another part of what you'll see. So this one starts out as kind of interesting. A fellow named Philippe shows up, and Ramesh says, as always, the first thing that he would ask would be, "What do you do in life?" And Philippe says, "Well, I used to race cars, drive racing cars." Ramesh, "Oh wow." He says, "Yeah, I stopped in 1991. It's a very good discipline. Total concentration, isn't it?" Ramesh says. Philippe says, "Yeah." He says, "The top drivers know there is no driver there when they perform." That's a kind of an interesting way to break into it, huh? Ramesh, of course, loves that. Quite right. He says, "Philippe, that is the winning attitude, and there are a lot of common things to what we were talking about here. All these guys are very close to what we were talking about here, but they are only like that when they're in the car." All right. That's right. So they live in the present moment only for a limited period. He says, "Yes, their lives can be havoc." Ramesh, so in the car, they enjoy that peace that they enjoy in deep sleep. Philippe says, "Yes." And Ramesh says, "So there is no me then." So he starts out right with the pointer. There is no me. Now it's interesting. I just wanted to just kind of jump in and say, there's places where you hear this from other sources as well. And within our context, it makes a lot more sense, but you might have heard these, you might have not. I'm going to take one from Osho. Osho tells a story about Nijinsky, the great Russian ballet dancer. And evidently a reporter or somebody said to Nijinsky, he says, "Hey, you speak about your occasional disappearance. That surprises me." And Nijinsky responds, and I'm reading Osho's version. He said, "I'm as much surprised as you are. I don't know. And whenever I try to do it, it never happens." Note that. "It happens only once in a while when I've completely forgotten about it. When the dancers disappears, when there is no Nijinsky, it happens." He says, "I am just a watcher, just as you are a watcher. I see my body falling down. I've tried it in private, tried every possible way. Neither can I jump that high, nor can I fall that slow. I've tried in front of my friends, my lovers, but whenever I have tried, it has simply escaped from my hands." So I have learned one thing. There are things which you cannot try. There are things that are not possible through any method, any technique, any strategy. There are things which happen, you only have to allow them to happen. Right. And even that actually we could amend a little. And the way you allow them is not to interfere. So he qualifies it. So much so that you are not even present, because your presence will also be an interference. And when he talks about presence, he's talking about the ego. Right. That's he's not talking about an I am, he's actually talking about the ego. So when you're there, and we used to say that when Nijinsky dances, Nijinsky's not there, and that was always that particular story. So notice that pointer. That's right where Ramesh started. He started with exactly that same pointer. Years ago, I used to do leadership work, and one of the companies I did work with is called North Face. Now, North Face hires a whole bunch of climbers. And one day we were sitting with the climbers in a room talking to them, and this woman, we were asking, like, what fueled the insane thing that these guys do? If you look at what these mountain climbers do, there's an insanity to it, how much they climb for hours. And she said, every now and then, about twice or three times a year, she says, I crest the peak and I look out and suddenly I'm not there. And she says, I climb for those 2 or 3 times. Everything that you see me do is for those 2 or 3 times. Right. So in the world, this sense of not being there, right? The sense that the ego is not there isn't really all that unusual. Right. But we don't notice it. Right. The reconstitution of the ego is really quick. And so, and it immediately takes over. And certainly it immediately takes over for someone who doesn't have an awareness that this is actually a free sample, is what we would call it, right? This is a free sample that they're having. So in essence, you can see race car drivers, this pureness of the driving of the car, a mountain climber that crests, the Nijinsky who dances, and at times, occasionally, he simply isn't there. Right. So that's not unusual. Watch for that. Right. So let me jump ahead in Ramesh's song here, because they talk about accidents and so he says, so Philippe, he says, this spiritual seeking, he said, how long has this been going on? He says, a long time. I think I was 16 when I actually engaged. It started, as it does for all of us, with not accepted what was given for truth around me. I had this feeling that there was something else behind. Quite right. Yes, Ramesh says. So seeing something behind that, here's a pointer now. He's going to start with a really easy pointer. He started, he picked up on the car, driving the car was in this pure presence, but he knows he's dealing with someone who is, in essence, at the beginning. So now what he's going to do is he's going to do a build. He's going to put together some pointers and take him to that same place so that he understands some of the depth that's going on here. He says, if I put an apple in my hand, what do you see? You would say an apple. He says, I remove that apple. What do you see now? Nothing. Interesting, an apple and nothing. But in both instances, the hand was there. All right, notice what the mind does. It fixes so much on the fact that we're playing hide and seek with an apple that it completely eliminates the fact that the hand is always a visual reference. It's there, right? He says the apple may be there or the apple may not be there, but the hand is there all the time. Right. And then they go on, there's just a little bit of a detour they take, which I find interesting, and I'll go through it. He said, how do you speak English so well? He says, because in racing, the international language is English. I see. You have to communicate a lot. He says, yes, it's tricky. I don't master it as well as it looks, But then again, I feel English is a very good spiritual language. Right? This is just something to note. Ramesh says, I think so too. You know why? For one reason, in English, you can differentiate between the I, and the me. I is the self, me is the individual entity. I'm told you cannot do this in many languages. Therefore, Ramana Maharshi, speaking in Tamil, was not able to use the language to differentiate between the two, you see. So he had to distinguish them by saying I for the self and I for me. Right? Just an interesting side note that the English just happens to be built for that particular pointer. Right? Gabriel, a new fellow, jumps in. He says, Bob Marley, the Jamaican Reggae Center, used I to show the true essence. Same thing. He's using I to say that. And Ramesh says he probably read Ramana Maharshi, unless the ego was doubly strong. So visitor. So everything is a concept, and you say only one thing. The isness cannot be denied, but it cannot be confirmed either. Hey, you got a pointer coming up, right? He says, if you don't deny it, where's the question of confirmation, my friend? Right? If you don't deny it, where's the question of confirmation? That's the whole point. The question of denying or confirming does not arise. You've been coming here for a few days. Can you tell me something about yourself? But notice what we do. We set ourselves up a lot of times in a judicial way. So we create a duality where there is no duality. He used to say, one knows that they exist, right? There's no denying that, but there's also no reason to confirm it, right? Because one exists. It's there, right? It's to set yourself in a judicial position of saying, I need to confirm that I exist is a craziness. And that's what Ramesh is trying to point out to him here.
It's self-evident.
Yeah, it just is, right? So he says, the visitor, can you tell me something about this body, mind, organism, which thinks he still comes here? What is your name? You have a name. He says, Ito. Ito, I see. And he is Yudo, and you are Ito. And Ito says, big difference. I know, but you see, that's my point. You say there is a big difference. I say there is no difference. They're just two names given to two body, mind organisms. Where's the difference? But you say big difference because you say I am Ito and he is Yudo. What's your specific question now, Gabriel? Notice how he wound that out. He says, why is there no discipline for the beginner? Right. A lot of people find that the way this is approached with pointers only and no interference with what arises to lack discipline. Right. And certainly when you compare it to other approaches, spiritual approaches, there isn't any, it doesn't look like discipline. He says, well, what I'm saying to the beginner is to meditate on the fact that you have no free will. Right? What is the discipline? Find out from your personal experience, from your past experience, and your experience of today, whether any act that happens is your act, or is it merely a mechanical reaction of the brain? Find out. Isn't that a discipline? Gabriel says it is. So I'm telling you that what you call your act does not exist. You cannot act. What you think is your action is merely a reaction of the brain to an outside event over which you have no control, according to the program over which you have had no control. Unless you find out from personal experience, it is no good. Now, notice what he did there, right? He gave him the pointer. And then the deeper pointer is, unless you find out from personal experience, it's no good. That's the actual rooting of the pointer itself. I live moment to moment. That is correct. Ramesh, quite right. What I'm telling you is to find out from moment to moment whether it was your action or was it merely a reaction. Ramana Maharshi said to ask yourself from moment to moment, who wants it? Who am I? Who wants something? That was his way, right? So Ramana was after the who is there, that was how he approached it. That was his pointer. My way is to find out from moment to moment if anything that happens is your action or is it merely a reaction of the brain? Right? That's his main pointer, just a different version of the same thing. Right. And you'll find that a lot of folks that speak, right, have their particular version because their body mind responded to something that was highly impactful, and that gets packaged into a pointer. So that's all that's going on here, is that while he appreciates Ramana Maharshi's approach, right? Now, Nisargadatta, what did he say? He said, go to the I am. Right. So he was actually leading one to the I am. So Ramana's, it's a bit different. Ramana's question, who am I? That's inquiry. Nisargadatta's go find the I am. And Ramesh's find out if what's happening is your happening or simply a happening. Right. You can see those differences in those particular all pointers, all beautiful pointers. Right. And one of those pointers likely is one that works, right? That would feel comfortable for you, wherever you happen to be. Now, for a lot of people, they may have moved beyond that, right? So now there are other pointers. I mean, in a way, we're cleaning out all the furniture from the basement here, and you have to take it out one stick at a time. So every pointer is an excavation piece, right? So the new pointers that come in are the next excavation piece for the basement. Mark says, and I want you to watch this because this is a very beautiful thing that he does. He says, I can only grasp that for a brief moment. Now, Ramesh's immediate line, he says, why are you able to accept it only briefly? He says, because of the misidentification with body and mind. Right? Now, I might say because the ego reconstitutes so quickly, and over time it reconstitutes less quickly. But that would be the way I would describe that same thing. He says, has that misidentification with body and mind happened? Did you create it? You didn't create it, right? So he immediately takes his pointer and he puts it into action. Mark, well, yesterday for the first time, I heard about your idea or concept of programming and so forth and so on, and it makes sense to me. Right. So Mark, who says I can only grasp that for a brief moment, just heard about it yesterday. So it makes entire sense that he can only grasp it for a brief moment. So that sense, the intellectual sense, can only be verified from personal experience. That is why I say from moment to moment, right? Let the pointer deepen, right? Ask yourself, have I done it or has it just happened? This is the only discipline which Gabriel is asking about. So the intellectual, is it happening? Did I make it happen or is it happening? And then the constant reassertion, if you will, of that exact pointer, because as life happens, right, one does that. Now it's interesting because a lot of people have a habit of compartmentalizing their life. So spirituality only applies to one part of the life and not to other parts of life. So in my world, what happened was that I was involved in corporate leadership. I'm dealing with people that are developing into leaders. And then some of those leaders, as you can imagine, showed an inclination towards spiritual seeking. And what I learned was that our corporate life included a whole set of events that arose and fell, just like the events in any other area. And so I specifically began to work with seekers that were in the corporate world using the happenings of the corporate world. So now we're talking about conference, board meetings and conference calls and, different things that would happen in the business world and asking that same question about them, right? Did you do that or did that just simply happen? There is no part of life that's in a compartment to which a pointer doesn't apply. Right? So you don't get to go to church just on Sundays, right? Manifestation is arising always and falling always. So you're always in the classroom. Your Sunday school is always, it's always happening, right? And there never will be, well, there's one bell, I assume, and after that bell, it doesn't happen anymore. And, I won't be here to report that, but the Sunday school will end at one point in time. Right? He says, Mark, I think that's an excellent discipline. He's talking about this deepening from intellectual. It's just that I find it extremely difficult. And when you first hear a pointer, it does. It seems just to be the oddest damn thing. The first time that someone says to you, hey, you know what you're doing? You're not actually doing it. You're like, yeah, and other drunk things, right? You're like, you got to be nuts, right? I know, Ramesh says, but whenever you remember, so see what he's done. Don't set up an egoic version. Whenever you remember, you do it. If you do it, that's good enough. Right? That's good enough. Right? Remember we talked about Ramesh when he was speaking last time and he was saying, just watch. That's all you need to do. Right? What do you need to do about it? Nothing. Right? And then when you begin to remember, then that remembering will be brought about by this very intellectual understanding. So there will be a sudden realization that you have not been asking the question, right? Then the question will happen. And so the understanding goes deeper. The sudden realization that you have not been asking the question will happen more frequently until it happens moment to moment. Then at the end of the day, you will say, this whole day I've been watching myself. There is no action, which is really my action. Then the mind intellect says that if Mark has not been doing anything, is there a Mark at all? You see? That's the obvious next question. And that is a big step in understanding. Right? So no force, no creation of a device that gets practiced. Right? He said, you see, and that's a big step in the understanding. The answer will come absolutely from personal experience. There is no Mark to do anything at all. That everything just happens because it is the destiny of this body-mind organism, and the will of God is the final understanding, which can only happen. That happens, right? Now, here's a really interesting thing. He said, Gabriel comes in, he says, in fact, that's very universal. Remember, we talked about Nijinsky dancing and all of those realizations the race car drivers are having. So this is all around us, this kind of sense of things, but notice what happens. It gets perverted. He goes, it is in fact very universal because Africans tend to believe God does everything. It is very universal. He said, and Ramesh says, that's what I'm saying, Gabriel. That's the universal phenomenal truth, or rather the basis of any religion, right? The basis of any religion is that God does it all. And yet, there are religious wars because the basic concept in every religion is interpreted in different ways. It never goes below that little intellectual to the actual happening as he walked Gabriel through that. That doesn't happen. Right? The living stays in the intellectual space. And when it stays in the intellectual space, we have disagreements about things. Right? I read today or yesterday that in Afghanistan, your hair must not come to your forehead because then the devil lives there. So there are barbers waiting to chop your hair off. There is an interpretation of Islam, and the basis of Islam, I am told, is universal love. Every Muslim frequently says, Insha Allah, which means God willing. One man will ask another, when are you going? Tomorrow. And often the reply is, Inshallah, God willing. Thy will be done. In another religion. In the Hindu religion, one says to God, you are the doer. You are the enjoyer. The basis is the same, and yet it is not accepted. So the sense of oneself is a separating process. Yes, it is. It's intellectual. It's an intellectual holding that never descends, if you will, right? And that's where the whole problem arises, Philippe, because each individual considers itself a separate entity, separate from the rest of the world. Now, here he gets into the next little piece, right? Because we talked about how pointers, right? The last couple times that we talk in the sense of the personal, right? And then it drops into the sense of the impersonal. So that's what he's wrestling with here. He says, but then whom do you address when you say your true nature? He says, you see, it is only that I am addressing it to that fictitious entity who comes to me and asks the question. Philippe, yes, but it is tricky because it seems that you consolidate this illusion when you say you have a true nature. Who is that you? And here Ramesh says, and I heard he would say this in 100 different ways, but always at least once a satsang. That fictitious entity asks me a question, and I can either answer it, give an answer to this fictitious entity, or sit silent. What do you want me to do? You see? The way he was said it the most often is he would say, someone would say, well, you mean to say all you really need to do is sit in pure silence? And he'd say, absolutely, except for you guys keep asking me questions. Same, right? So when the personal is used, the pointer still belongs in the personal experience, right? That's where it starts, right? And even though you can intellectually see that the personal experience is transcended, right, or descended, whichever way you like to go. I kind of like I like rooting in the basement. You can tell I use that a lot. So to me, it's always dissolution descends, but nonetheless, that's what happens. And so it's only the use of the impersonal, right? Which instead of I'm arising, right? The body mind arises, right? That would be the way to depersonalize it and still use language. That kind of languaging drives people crazy. I'm here to tell you, right? He said it's a matter of language, of course, but in anything that is written or said, the use of the personal pronoun, the impersonal formula, the use of the personal pronoun, the impersonal formulation, it's much easier. The personal is much easier. We're used to that, right? He says, but the point is the impersonal formulation, ultimately. The Upanishads say it all. Consciousness is all there is. An impersonal statement. Consciousness is all there is. If that is accepted, who is going to ask what question? Who can ask what question? Consciousness is all there is, which I expand into saying, okay, here he's going to walk him into another little pointer, help him out with this. Consciousness has scripted the movie. Consciousness has produced the movie. Consciousness is playing all the characters. Consciousness is witnessing the movie. What's the basis of all of this? Right? Consciousness is all there is. And if that is accepted, if that impersonal specification is accepted, consciousness is all there is, then who will ask the question, Philippe? Who is there to ask any question? There can't be any individual to ask any question, you see. That is why the Upanishads say the final word, consciousness is all there is. And if that is accepted, who can ask the questions, right? That's where he is, right? So, and then he goes on to say, this is something just to note. Many body-mind organisms which are programmed towards knowledge, jnana, will accept this, what he's just talked about, the universal consciousness, right? But what happens is that many intellects are not able to accept this impersonal specification. The body-mind organism, which is programmed towards devotion, bhakti, basically duality, such a body-mind organism will say to me, I'm sorry, I'm finding it very difficult to accept this impersonal consciousness or awareness. You tell me that everything happens according to the will of God, that I can accept. That body-mind organism has been programmed based on duality. So seeking is happening in both body-mind organisms. One is programmed towards knowledge and one is programmed towards devotion. So think about that for a minute. A third body-mind organism is programmed and says, I don't want your God. I don't want your consciousness. Tell me I must do this for the social good. That I can accept. So that body-mind organism has been programmed for karma yoga, you see, or seva. There is no individual seeker. You see, seeking has happened. There is no individual seeker. What kind of seeking happens according to the way the body-mind organism has been programmed. Now, it's really interesting if you look at the two traditions he just brought up, bhakti, right? Bhakti is love, right? And so what happens in bhakti, that love arises in such an intense place, right? And you can see that in the Christian prayers of St. John and I forget who the woman was who was with him, and you can see that the boundary disappears between them and God in those prayers. It's simply just.
Teresa of Avila.
Thank you. I thought it might be. I always get Mother Teresa and Teresa of Avila confused. So
Correct, yeah.
yeah, I hate to go. I was going to say Teresa, and I thought, no, that's Mother Teresa. It's another one. Anyway, but no, what happens is that's what bhakti does. It delivers one into that same place of no boundary. And in that, there's no me, right? If there's no separate me, then, all consciousness is all there is. In service, it's the same, karma yoga, right? In service, one serves another, and soon the other and you dissolve and disappear. There's no difference. When you serve another, you're serving yourself, in essence. Right? The only difference is that you see that in the other traditions, the speaking about it isn't as clear. It's all action. It's like the whirling dervishes, the Sufis, right? They just whirled until they disappeared. And when you would ask them questions about something, they say, no, just go whirl. Like, we don't, language not needed, right? So just recognize that for those who are in the path of jnana, right, that what leads one there is from the intellectual. The device of the intellectual basically morphs and descends into the actual lived experience, right? And so there's a lot. So we talk and point and talk and point and talk and point. That's what our little grouping is about. Now he goes on, because what he's trying to do, once again, now he's going to go down to the basement and get another piece of furniture out. Philippe says in the duet of one, the process which begins in one body-mind organism can go on for several lifetimes. Yes. Whose lives? Well, that's the point, Ramesh says. Several lives. Lives have been happening for thousands of years, Philippe. Whose lives? Yeah. There have been lives happening for thousands of years. Body-mind organisms have been created, and then they die. A body is created, a body dies. If you must ask whose lives, then in duality, I can say God's lives, you see. Lives, yes, but not whose lives. Right? So something is wanting to happen, and it takes a lot of body minds to have that happen, then that's what happens. So he says, so there's no relationship, and Ramesh says there is no relationship from one life to another. That is my concept. Why does this theory of rebirth come in? Philippe says social control. He says, no, one basic E, not social control, although that's certainly a good answer. He says the ego says, I cannot but accept. It's a fact of life, the body will die. But what is going to happen to me? When the ego is real, the question, what's going to happen to me, applies to the ego. That is why this rebirth you see, that is why this rebirth you see. So with the question, the me is told by certain religions to do good, so that in your next life, you'll have a nice life. Yeah, and Philippe says, yeah, that's where the social control steps in. And he goes, that's the point. Therefore, the basis of this rebirth instruction is socioeconomic. It tells you to be a good boy, so that in the next life, you'll be a better boy. All right. And it goes to such extent to say that if you do bad things, you'll be reborn a frog. You see, it goes to any extent. Once you are a human being, you cannot become a frog. Why not? Right? Because that's one of the things that people will say. Why not? Both Ramesh and Philippe laughing. You go into conceptualizing. Buddhists say that, Gabriel says. He said, that's right. That's absolutely right. Then he goes on and he says, it's all conceptual. My basic question is only one thing. If Philippe is supposed to do good deeds so that Philippe will have a good next life, then in the next life, will there be a Philippe? Or will there be a Robert? And Robert wouldn't care a damn for Philippe, just that Philippe now knows nothing about his previous life. So Philippe cannot have a new life. In the new life, there will be a new ego. Prakash comes on and says, that's a concept. Another pointer, right? Because what happens in the reconstitution of the ego, in that reconstitution, you can almost always find an objection, right? The reconstitution of the ego is just simply the ego basically rejecting, right? Or reconstituting or objecting. He's heard the pointer, but he has a reason why it's not true, right? That's just a concept, right? He says it is a concept. You must have heard me say it 100 times. Whatever I say is a concept. Whatever any sage has said at any time is a concept. Whatever any scripture of any religion has said is a concept. That God is a concept, and there is no God, and there is no God are concepts. The only thing which is not a concept is that which no one can deny that he exists. I am, I exist. And personally, there is existence. Personally, there is no existence. All right. So there you go. All right. Now there's a lot more to this one. He goes on, but if I don't know if you noticed how he did that. In each case, he built it, he built it, he built it. As the objections came, he had a response for that objection, which took another piece of furniture out of the basement, right? So that's what we're doing, is emptying the basement. So that's how pointers operate. Okay, so if you watch how that happens, right, that can become a happening within the experience that arises in this body mind, right? One starts to track the objections of the ego and the reconstitution, right? And here's what's really fascinating. It used to happen a lot, was the objection would come and I would go, oh man, I don't have anything for that one. But then a knowing would occur which said, but there is one, right? The and that's the dedication, if you will, right? What 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 Nisargadatta and Ramesh call earnestness, right? It's the understanding in the beginning that there's something here, there's a movement internally that's having this happen, right? So that when the objections of the reconstitution happen, when the ego is getting itself ready for the next round, right? There's not a despair about the fact that there's not a response to that. Don't know the response, but there's a response. And that's a very, very wonderful sense to have, is that there is a response. All right. Well, I'm going to we're gonna have a little fun today. I wrote a book called Awaken Leadership, and when I wrote it, I asked a friend of mine. He had a little poem, and I said, "Hey, can we put that little poem in as an intermission?" Because I had a part that were all stories, and then I actually moved into a more corporate part of it. And so That friend was Brad, and I thought Brad could actually jump in. It's a lot of fun, and Brad can give us an intermission before I go on to the next little piece I'm
It,
gonna
it,
do.
it was actually a song, Alan. Uh,
I didn't realize that, but certainly sounds like one.
but the lyrics are, here's the idea basically. I was living out in Arizona at the time, and there's a lot of guys that farm cotton out there, amazingly. And I was wondering what would happen if a redneck guy on his tractor one day suddenly became totally enlightened. No small self at all, just gone, right? And what that might be like. And it turned into a song, but I'll just kind of half sing the lyrics so you can get a kick out of it. And I'll cut it short and won't repeat the choruses so we can make it pretty brief, but it goes like this. And he goes, I was minding my own business when suddenly an isness hopped inside of my head. I thought I was lost or I had a brain holocaust. Oh, baby, I thought I was dead. I was sitting on my tractor when that nuclear reactor went off inside of my brain. And then heavens above, there wasn't nothing left of that me that went down the drain. That's right. Now it's the redneck and light and rodeo wherever I go. Oh yeah. It's just the redneck in light and rodeo, bo do do do. Uh-huh. And now everywhere I go, everything I see, everyone I talk to is one and only me. It's the redneck in light and rodeo wherever I go. Oh, oh yeah. It's just the redneck in light and rodeo. Bo do do do. All right. My baby thought I lost it the day I got accosted by two guys wearing white coats. They said, boy, we had enough of your enlightenment stuff because, buddy, you're rocking the boat. Then I flashed back to my tractor and that nuclear reactor and said, boys, ain't nobody here. Better get your butts on home and get your boss on the phone and tell him I done disappeared. And then at the very end it goes, so baby, don't get excited and don't cause a riot, 'cause the writing's right here on the wall. I'm at the redneck and lighting rodeo and having a ball. You know I am right here at the redneck and lighting rodeo. Bo do do do, papa tupu tapa tapa. Good God, y'all! So there's my
That's
comic
awesome.
relief. What would happen if a guy suddenly became enlightened like that? I
Oh,
like the part because he was
right.
talking about disappearing. Tell him I'd done disappeared was in the song I wrote, you
It
know. And he put it in his book as the intermission. I thought that was hilarious.
was
Didn't see
always
it coming.
funny. It was funny because the book actually did really well. So it was in a lot of offices here, there, and everywhere. And there was more than one comment on the fact that that particular piece was in the middle of the book, right? In other words, that's not exactly what you expect when you read a corporate leadership
Well,
book.
no kidding. And
Yeah,
what the
yeah,
hell was that about, Alan?
yeah, yeah. I know that the people are like, wow, where did you come up with that? Well, I said I needed an intermission, and I have a friend that was in the business, and I said, can you give me something that's an intermission? And this is what he gave me. I love it.
Yeah,
Anyway, I thought you
very
guys would
helpful.
enjoy that. All right. So here's I just want so I don't know if you noticed, but here's where we go. Um, there's a discrimination piece, right, within the pointers that that helps keep all the junk out that's already been cleared out, right? I mean, it's like there's that Mutt and Jeff story that we tell all the time. There's this cartoon out of the whenever it was the 40s or 50s when those were written. There was a famous Mutt and Jeff. And so one day you can see that Mutt is pushing Jeff. Jeff's in a car, a little kind of a go-kart kind of a car, and he's pushing him up the hill with incredibly great effort, right? And he pushes and pushes, and man, they finally get to the top. And Mutt says to Jeff, he says, man, he says, that's the hardest thing I've ever done. I wasn't sure I was going to make it. And Jeff says, hey, brother, he says, I have you covered. I had the brake on the whole way. So I want you to know The take the break off. That one, that's just kind of the message of this whole thing is to take a look at, where it is that's moving, right? And to be with that. So I wrote a little piece called Be Where You Are. And it says, one of the great confusions for the aspirant is what appear to be contradictions in Advaitic teachings. Ramesh Balsekar once remarked that in I Am That you will find many of them. To one seeker, Nisargadatta might say, you must meditate, while to another he would say, your whole trouble is that you meditate. At first, this seems maddening. Ramesh said he pondered this for months before realizing that what was happening, the later pointer had simply transcended the earlier one. Right? Now, once it's transcended, it's gone, right? No longer at exactly the throw away the thorn. There's a story that illustrates this perfectly. Swami Vivekananda, a great Jnani, found his guru in Ramakrishna Paramahansa, whose own expression was devotion or bhakti. Yet Ramakrishna immediately recognized that Vivekananda's nature was knowledge. One day, Ramakrishna pulled out a copy of the Gita from under his pillow, and he asked Vivekananda to read it aloud. After a few stanzas, Vivekananda protested. He said, this is sacrilege. I won't read this any further. It says, I am God. How can that be? Which to a bhakti might be a sacrilege. He goes, this is a sacrilege. Ramakrishna calmly replied, all right, don't read it for yourself. Read it for me. Vivekananda continued reading. Something shifted. The resistance disappeared. The reader himself dissolved in the understanding. Although Ramakrishna's own nature was devotion, he could recognize knowledge in his disciple. Consciousness always finds its prey. That's how the teaching works. A pointer is not a universal rule. It is medicine applied to the seeker who stands in front of the teacher. What removes one illusion may later become another illusion itself. This is why sages describe teachings as tools or pointers, and oftentimes devices, by the way. I thought of that later. Ramana Maharshi spoke of the thorn used to one to remove another. Once the first thorn is removed, both are discarded. Gautama Buddha used the image of a raft crossing a river. Once the far shore is reached, the raft is left behind. Even Nisargadatta pointed out that the simple sense of I am is always present, while the mind adds the qualifiers, I am this or I am that. The teaching begins with a sense of being, but even that pointer eventually dissolves. The tool appears, the tool is used, the tool disappears. I learned this long before I knew anything about Advaita. When I was with Osho, Bhakti and Tantra were the currency of the ashram. Advaita was available, but very few could hold the sense of that path. At that time, it would have been far beyond my ability to absorb. Yet this too was simply the pointer appropriate to where I stood. Bhakti and Tantra and that was where I was. That was the pointer. Right? I love the tantric invitation to squeeze life like a lemon in the vast devotional ocean of bhakti. But eventually it became clear that my own nature was jnana. The pointer had changed. It shifted. Now look carefully at what we are all up against. Humans live in what I call an assumptive state. They assume they are individual body minds making decisions. Their intellectual definitions appeared fixed and universal, but they are really provisional constructions. So we've been after all day, right? The ego has developed the sense that things are fixed and universal. That operates in us, right? What we call truth is simply a conclusion operating inside a larger story. And consciousness organizes experience according to whatever frame we are holding. It's real handy that way. Our intellectual positions are empty sets awaiting the next organizing movement of consciousness. But there is grace in this system. Conscious not only sustains our assumptions, it quietly magnetizes us towards awakening. All right? So it sustains our assumptions, but it also allows them to dissolve. That intuitive pull that draws you to satsang, that is consciousness recognizing itself beneath the story. Yet seekers often become confused by the apparent contradictions in in teachings. Why? Because of the assumptions that we carry, the assumptive state. I often use two little pointers to illustrate this. The first one I call all memes are equal. Today we scroll endlessly through quotes and spiritual memes. If the source appears wise, we assume the wisdom must be universally applicable. We repost it, we memorize it, we treat it as equal to every other piece of wisdom we encounter. Now you notice how Ramesh, he used different, as they descended, they're different pieces. But we think memes are all the same, so we post them. That's wisdom. A beautiful master once read aloud a beautiful text. Everyone was deeply impressed. Immediately someone asked, who wrote it? As though that mattered. The master replied, if I told you Buddha wrote it, you would venerate it and place flowers before it. If a patriarch wrote it, you would respect it, but not worship it. If I said a monk wrote it, you would not know how to react. And if I said our cook wrote it, you would laugh. We judge wisdom by authority rather than applicability. Right? The second pointer is what I call the need to feed. The same assumptive state drives us to consume spiritual content relentlessly. Even when a pointer clearly resonates, we rarely stay with it long enough for it to do its work. We rush immediately to the next teaching, the next book, the next meme. You can see the train wreck that this creates. All wisdom treated as equal so long as it comes from the correct authority, and none of it is allowed to penetrate because we're already moving on. Right? But in truth, there is nothing contradictory in the teachings. Understanding moves, and when understanding moves, new pointers naturally replace old pointers. The pointer that appears at the right moment is always the perfect one. It means you are exactly where you are. There is no need to struggle with apparent contradictions unless that struggle itself becomes the next pointer. Eventually, the final pointer appears. It is wordless, it is silent. Right? Until then, simply look. Do you recognize the need to feed operating in you? Do you treat every spiritual quote as equal because of who said it? Perhaps you've already moved beyond these tendencies, yet the conditioning still whispers that you must keep searching for something more. What should you do? Nothing. Let the pointer make its space within you. Stop searching for the next one. Watch. Just watch. Right? So that was the whole point of today, right? To recognize where the pointer is resonating right now, right? The consumption of all of the content, if it's interesting, great, but recognize that likely you've been built to consume. I think we all have, right? We've all been built to consume, right? So we love posting wisdom and all of the rest of it. Just recognize that. That's all. Because that in and of itself today is just a conversation about, I would call it discrimination, right? So don't become confused when someone uses personal languaging if the understanding is already there that there is no you. If there is no you, when I say you to you, all right, it's just linguistic, right? Osho used to say that. They go, but Osho, there's still an ego. And he says, yeah, how you expect me to answer when you call me? That's its function. It's operational, right? It's just not who you are, right? It's just operational.
I
So,
remember you saying something once.
yep,
It says, the only reasons we have names is so when somebody says, hey, Alan, you can turn and go, what? I
there you go.
love
Right.
that.
It's the function. That's the function of the ego, right? So the apparent separation is dealt with through the use of a language of separation, but it's not who you are. So when that apparent separation is being dealt with using a illusionary language of separation, okay, there's a recognition internally, right? The pointer that one is actually in the midst of isn't that pointer. right? So that's not the picnic bench you stop at. You're shooting for the taco bench, right? Not the stuff before. That's how that worked. But I'm just saying that's really what today was meant to do. And notice what happens too when there's a recognition that this is the case. Well, there's never going to be an argument about anything, right? Because body minds are in different arcs, right? So arguments are just simply a function of two body minds in two different arcs pretending, right? Pretending that there's something that applies equally to both of them. When from a dualistic standpoint, there just simply isn't. Right? There just simply isn't. So that's the recognition. All right. Any comments or questions at this juncture? We're essentially done in terms of me yakking.
I can think of one more thing, but I want to make sure that that anybody else has a chance because I don't want to overdo myself in this thing today.
Go for it, Brad.
Anybody? Okay. I'm thinking that with all these different pointers over all these years that seemed valuable at the time, and we started accumulating them, and every one of them basically is hinting at the silence underneath, where the unspoken perfection of it really lives. And if any of them takes you there for a minute or so, it's like, oh, we think that a particular pointer is like the end, but it's getting closer and closer to residing in the silence that really gets you going in a beautiful way. That's pretty much what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, when somebody asks, because Ramana Maharshi would do the "Who am I?" But what did he use before that? He sat in a cave and people came and sat with him.
Yeah, right.
Say a word. But which is a wonderful thing, but you can imagine how many folks are available to that. So those folks that are in a seeking path who have been highly educated and that the ego is the only thing they know, sitting in silence. I remember the first time I was in the ashram and I'm sitting in meditations. Like, I would sit in meditation, I kid you not, for like a minute or two. And I would have given you a sworn affidavit that I'd been there for an hour because it felt like that 2 minutes felt like an hour to me. Right. There was no doubt about it. There's this, it's funny. It's funny. There's a rapper who does this Indian fellow who does these kind of fun things with spirituality. And he's doing this one. He's an LA guy. He's got the big gold chain on, and he says, "Yeah, I knocked that hour meditation out in 5 minutes." and it's like that. So silence, which is absolutely the ultimate, if you will, is not in a lot of folks' space, for a possibility. And so until then, pointers and service and love and those other activities are the ones that are involved in the dissolving of the apparent boundaries. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I will see everybody next week. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed I probably did a great job, but I really enjoyed the Ramesh stuff. It's always fun to do that. I can see the twinkle in his eye. When he says, but you guys keep asking me questions. So anyway, so much love. Is there something you want to say, Michael, before we leave? We're good. Okay.
I was just showing my face before we signed
I
off.
appreciate it. No, you came on. Oh, maybe he has something to tell us all. So we will see everyone next week. And much love and
looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Alrighty,
Thank
thanks,
you,
John.
Alan.
It was
That was
awesome.
okay.
Yeah,
Guys.
really good.
Thanks, brother.